Welcome back to Fast Market here on the Schwab Network. It's time for cash tags. For that, let's bring in our next guest. That's going to be Megan Brantley. She's the VP of Research at LikeFolio. Welcome back to the show, Megan.
Thanks for having me, guys. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you, and happy 2025 to Wayfair shareholders. What's going on with this one, Megan? I think, they were left for dead. I mean, this stock got down to $20. We're trading about 65 right now. Are you guys have data that kind of supports the rally that we've seen over the last few months?
Yeah, this stock has been on an absolute tear since those April lows that you just mentioned. And, recently it's had a slew of upgrades come through. And we think that probably that tariff-induced fear sell-off was a bit overdone. But we also think that this run-up since then is probably a bit too far, too fast, at least in what our data is showing. When we look at this name, and this is a name where our web data is really powerful because Wayfair is really an e-commerce site, right? That was this company's entire intrigue and its kind of break into this furniture market. I think it's starting to open up some physical locations. I think it has its fourth store planned for next year. But just to give scale, this e-commerce data is really, really valuable when we're looking at Wayfair. And we see a couple of themes, I would say, across the board whenever you look at a lot of the different, home goods and furniture suppliers like a Wayfair. We see weakness just as a macro trend here. You can see Wayfair kind of in the middle to the lower end of the range of names that we're looking at right there. And, down 7% year over year. When we look at app data, so you might say, oh, well, a lot of people have downloaded the app and are, engaging with the app to search Wayfair and things like that. We actually have app data looking worse than our web data. We have monthly active users down around 11% in June, and they were down about 25% in July. So starting to see some improvements, but still down pretty significantly. And whenever you pair this with the recent run that the stock has had, we start to worry that expectations may be getting a bit too high, that consumers just aren't pulling the trigger on some of those larger purchases. When you think about a purchase like furniture, that's a bigger ticket item than some of these smaller purchases. And we've started to see a bit of a pullback, and especially that lower income consumer that may be looking at a Wayfair for the value that it provides for the lower cost furniture. So we're starting to see some problems rippling up in this bullish thesis for this name. So heading into earnings, we're certainly very cautious.
Megan, this company still unprofitable at this age of its. It just doesn't seem to me. And you're right, it's had a nice run. They had a good first quarter. But what's there, other than being e-commerce, which is not insignificant, do they have a moat? Do they have some, because competition is going to be all over this long term. I read a couple articles on this company, and it was just a growing level of concern. They're restructuring debt. It's going to cost them about $50 million to restructure debt at a higher interest rate. They just don't seem to have the big incentives. They give a lot of stock-based compensation, that's why they're able to control expenses. That will eventually hurt them down the road. Is this company just doing enough? Is it high quality enough to justify a valuation like this, especially, Megan, when they're not profitable yet?
I think that you make some really valid points. And I think that, for us, we're really focused on what the consumer is saying about the company. And we're starting to, you ask about value in terms of the consumer's perspective. We're seeing some signs of degradation of sentiment. And I think that you make a really cool point about moat, because we're seeing consumers who said, at one point, Wayfair was this novel concept during the pandemic. You could go online and order, furniture and things like that. And that was really when Wayfair was in its heyday. However, now you can go on Amazon and you can search for things. You can go on other retailers that have this strong brick and mortar presence and shop online for furniture. So I don't think it's quite as novel of a concept as it once was. And whenever consumers are talking about quality, they're just not impressed with the overall quality that they're getting whenever they buy something from Wayfair. They're kind of acknowledging, well, I paid for what I got. We see increasing talks about people who are talking about, delays in shipments, poor customer service. having to assemble for hours a cheap set of patio furniture. And so I think that, there's a value proposition in the sense of the price point may be a bit lower for some consumers. So if maybe they're not willing to make a major splurge on furniture or home goods, this is kind of a value play for them. However, long term, I'm not sure how that fares for the company. And for us, the biggest long term indicator on future growth for a company tends to be that consumer sentiment level. So whenever we start to see web visits decline, app engagements decline, and also that sentiment decline, that kind of throws some red flags in our universe. So this isn't one that we're willing to bet on for the long term, but we're also not necessarily betting on it heading into this earnings event either.
Yeah, that one graphic that you have, Megan, that kind of reflects the share price rallying pretty significantly. You guys see a little bump there going in to this report, but to go from $20 to $65, I mean, what kind of earnings score do you have on this one going into the report? Because it seems like getting a little stretched here on some of these levels.
So, our score heading into this report is a -14, but I think just from the eyeball test that you mentioned and reading through some of these mentions, I think that you could definitely justify a play to the downside heading into this one.
All right, great stuff. Great data. As always, Megan, appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys. You too.
All right, that's Megan Brantley, VP of Research at LikeFolio, breaking down Wayfair. Yeah, Kevin,